welcome to the Fantasy Rewind podcast. I'm your co-host, Dylan Stoll, and I'm joined as always by my friend Mike.
Hey!
So today, we are continuing on with House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 5?
Prince Regent.
Prince Regent. Alright, I was a little unsure if it was 5 or 6 there that we were doing, but
it was
Episode 5, Prince Regent. Alright, so before we go on to the episode, the typical reminders are, if you would like to get in contact with the show, you can send us an email at fantasyrewindpod@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram, which is at fantasyrewindpod, and X, which is at fantasyrewind. Alright, without any farther delay, Mike, let's dive into the rewind.
Fantasy Rewind. All right, Dylan. So a lot happened in this episode, even though not a lot happened. You know, it's one of those ones where it's like all of these, like all the political intrigue and all the fallout from that big epic battle we had last time. So let's dive right in here. I really want to kind of start with talking about the leader of Driftmark,
Corlys Velaryon.
Corlys Velaryon. Thank you. And so we sort of start off with him, right? And he's hearing about his wife's death, which that's kind of the beginning of this episode and the whole episode really is the fallout from that battle, like we said. And, you know, the big thing being Meleys and Rhaenys have died. And on the flip side, Aegon and Sunfire have been gravely injured.
I'm not sure if Sunfire's dead. But I know that Aegon is not dead.
That's why I said gravely injured. Like, it's like on that borderline-ish.
Yeah.
We don't really know what happened. But typically, if you don't see them die on screen, they're not dead.
Right.
And I can't really think of any other cases of that in Game of Thrones, you know, where it's like, oh, they died off screen and they're actually dead. Outside of them, and then you eventually see their head, I guess. That would be probably the thing. But we have him realizing his wife's passing, and his storyline just, you know, he kind of gets asked to be the hand of the king by the end of this episode, and his is really that grief and sort of encapsulating kind of his whole house's fall. And I think that was like kind of a big thing in this episode. It really kind of came across, you know. But we had an episode earlier, I think this season, where we saw their castle and it was this huge, glowing, beautiful thing, right? And then, or maybe that was first season. And then this one, you come in and it's very dark, and it really resonates with this whole tomb aspect. And like everything he's worked for was really for naught.
Right.
He's lost everything.
Yep, all of his legitimate children are dead or thought dead. His wife is dead. His grandchildren know nothing about the sea and aren't really, well, half of them aren't really his grandchildren. And so his legacy really is in question right now because, like you said, he has this giant reputation, this giant castle, and it's all for naught.
Yeah. And so that was pretty powerful, you know, when you sit and think about that for a little bit. Like, he was really somebody who kind of built his house up. And, he lost it all in the Game of Thrones. Speaking about big castles, let's flip over to Daemon and all of his going-ons. And I have to say, by the end of this episode, I had read this somewhere, and that Rivers, the woman there, is just a figment of his imagination. And I was like, no. And then as I started to think about it, I don't think we've seen her really with anyone else. And anytime we have seen her, no one seemed to notice her or talk with her. Like, Daemon's the only person who has conversations with her. But you're seeing him kind of slip farther into this Harrenhal curse, if you will. So going so far as to, in his dreams, make love to his mom.
Yeah. You know, they like to keep it close to the family in Game of Thrones, and especially them Targaryens, and
them Targaryens.
Apparently, Daemon's no exception, and well, I mean, he's married to his niece, so of course he's no exception. Yeah. But I did hear some funny stuff about how people are kind of okay with that, but that they thought that Daemon sleeping with his mother in his dreams crossed a line. And I mean, I understand that's obviously, not happening in our society or anything like that, but I mean, it all is all over that line, all the way there. But really, this episode for me was one episode too much as far as having Damon trip balls in Harrenhal. Because, by the end of this episode, I was like, I'm so ready for Damon to, do anything else.
Yeah.
Just like, this is just too much stalling, too much weirdness going on of pointless stuff happening for Damon. And it's compounded by the fact that this is all made up for the show. That when Damon came to Harrenhal in the books, he came to Harrenhal with an army, first of all.
Oh, wow, really?
Took Harrenhal, took the wealth of Harrenhal, and then claimed it for his wife, Rhaenyra, as opposed to him being this, power-hungry, demented dude that we're seeing here in the show. So it's just one episode too far for me of just having him go into madness at this place.
Yeah, well, I think they're definitely trying to get into his character a lot more through these dreams and stuff, trying to really delve into him and flesh him out a bit other than just being the bad boy.
Right, right.
And I think, too, you have a lot of parallels between him and Aemon.
Definitely.
On the other side.
And I mean, I'm pretty sure we see it in this episode where he envisions himself wearing the eye patch as opposed to Aemon wearing the eye patch.
Yeah, maybe that. Yeah, it was one of these.
It was one of these episodes. One of these times when he was tripping out in Harrenhal. But I think, just in general, that this Harrenhal part with Damon, it's dragged on longer than I would like it to, and it's no longer really welcome for me. But to address what you said about Alice Rivers, I'm pretty sure Simon Strong mentioned something about her earlier on, and I will tell you that she is not a figment of his imagination.
Okay, that's good. You see, there was one point where she walked past him and he looked over in that direction, but he wasn't looking at her. It was he was just looking off to the side. So it was I didn't. Anyway,
yeah, she's a full character. She has her own story.
Cool, can't wait to hear it. But we do have Damon. He does do something.
Not something good.
No, he just keeps making bumbling steps here. The Brackens and the whatevers.
The Blackwoods.
It's a whole mess. Talk about getting yourself involved with two groups. He need to, get those leaders
Sit them
down with his dragon right behind him and be either y'all are going to work for me.
Right.
Or you're going to roast.
Right, yeah. Your feud is done. Get over it. You both work for me now.
Or figure out a way that he could be you know what, whichever side works best for me by the end of this war, we're going to give you some more money and then you can continue more money than the other side or whatever.
Or give you the other side's land.
You guys then can continue your feud. Have them compete. Use that
that rivalry.
This grudge. Yeah, this rivalry to your advantage. Get them to work for you and, leverage that. Don't do what you did, which was basically tell them they could do whatever they wanted to and then fly your flags and kill women and
Yeah, so Damon basically gives whichever side works for him. I think it's the Blackwoods or the Brackens, one of the two. It's one of the two. Anyway, so he gives them permission without permission to go and do atrocities to the other side. All because he's there's some things the crown can't be seen doing, but they need to be done. And so he's do what you have to do. And so we find out by the end of this episode that the River Lords are not happy about this because while the henchmen that he's kind of gotten in bed with go and do all these terrible things, they're flying the Targaryen flag. And more importantly, they're flying Rhaenyra's flag, which basically says that she gives her approval for all these bad things that are happening.
Yeah.
Murdering and raping women, murdering children, doing all kinds of stuff. And it just farther puts these Riverlanders up against Daemon. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to bow to a tyrant. Get out of here, before we make you leave. And Daemon realizes that he's really messed up now.
Yeah. And he's also, he also kind of came out and said to Rivers, right, I think it was Rivers, where he was like saying how he would rule as a king at Rhaenyra's side, like, because they're not ready for, not every they're going to need a strong man. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really interesting because if you have anything to add about that, you can, because I'm going to flip over to the Greens in just a moment with kind of Alicent here, because you saw on the flip side of that, Alicent, who was a strong female presence, who ruled in the stead of her king, for a while there. Like all of a sudden, Aegon comes back and he's incapable, and they're like, who's going to lead? And she's like, well, I did a really good job when Jaehaerys was down and out. And they're like, yeah, no, sorry. He was cool with women being of equal power, obviously, because he really did want his daughter to be queen.
Right.
But that's not how things are done here. So women get to the back.
Right. And just to quickly go back to Daemon, there was like the good line here where he says to Simon Strong, what do you call the husband of the queen? And Simon Strong's like, the king. And he's like, well, there you go. The king consort. And Daemon's like, I could go without that last bit there. And like, this is the first episode I think you see since Daemon has left Rhaenyra's side here, where he fully comes out and says, forget her, I'm going to try and do this for me. And again, this is a big departure from the books, where Daemon does not go all macho man, I need to be the king, I can't support my wife. In the books, he definitely is loyal to Rhaenyra. And so we'll see the repercussions of this choice, hopefully, down the line here.
And that's something to remember, too, is that in the books are like a history, but it's written by somebody, right?
Right, so it's like written by a maester, as well as like input from a couple other sources as well. And like one of the sources is a jester who like is more lewd and more fantastical in his accounting of the histories, whereas like the maester is more like, this is what happened like officially, and like the truth lies like kind of somewhere in between a lot of these times.
And even with that, like I think the reason this works so well too for being adapted is that history is written by the winner, right? So how they interpret things, it's going to change over time either way. But this retelling, like how we're seeing it now, would transcribe and be perceived differently from somebody, as well. So
right. I mean,
I think
also
it's kind of fun.
Right now, Daemon is the only person who's a Targaryen out there witnessing all this stuff happening. And if like he was to be interviewed for like his account of what happened while he was gone, he's not going to say that, yeah, I rebelled against my wife. He would say, yeah, I was there doing my duty, trying to show my worth.
Yeah. Yes. Let's flip over to Rhaenyra and the rest of Team Black here, and then we'll get over to the Greens. I think that might be a good way to do it. So Rhaenyra dealing obviously with Rhaenys' death. And a big thing throughout this episode with them is by the end, I would say we're getting into the dragon seeds sort of coming to fruition, right?
Right.
That's sort of like towards the end of this episode, kind of what we're walking away with. But she's dealing with Meleys's death and Rhaenys' death, and she's getting told from her council, that what does she know of swords and warfare, and she's getting that whole sexist bit too, same as over on the green side, the queen can't with this. And it's her retort there, like, I've seen about as much as you have.
Right, I've seen as much war as you, because we've lived in peaceful time, thanks to my father.
Yes. And, they don't really have... I think that's such a great line.
It's a fantastic line.
You are basing everything off of my gender rather than my ability.
Right.
Although
I will say that by the end of this episode, she understands that there is truth in what is being said. That she was not raised as a warrior. She does not have, that military knowledge, necessarily. And this kind of, to me, goes back to a little bit what Alicent was telling Aegon about how a good leader doesn't go and just do all the things because he's all powerful or they're all knowing. They listen to their advisors and everything. So she does come back towards the end of the episode, Rhaenyra does, and kind of acknowledges her shortcomings in military stratagem. But she does it in a way that I think is very tactful, and also kind of still says, I'm in charge here. I'm still the queen. I may not know as much military stuff as you, but you still need to listen to me at the end of the day.
Yeah, and she does send the one guy to go check on Daemon.
Yeah, so she does send the one guy to go check on Daemon. And this is where I think that the book happenings and the show happenings are going to merge. Because, if she's sending this guy with his people to go check on Daemon, I'm assuming that will be taking the place of the army that Daemon had when he originally took Harrenhal, too. But something else does happen here, and it is Jace, going and coming into his own, going and visiting the Freys.
And they're not as bad.
Maybe. Not as prominent.
Yeah. No. But yeah, they meet on the bridge there, and he basically strikes a deal with them, right?
Yes.
So the men of the North and all that can come on down. And
now, will the Freys keep their word, though?
Yeah, that's a good question. If, future Game of Thrones is anything, I'd say no, but the fact that they're still around in the future, I would say yes.
Right.
But yeah, he does. And I think that was really cool for him. He's actually done something. Yes. Before he probably dies. Some terrible death.
Well, it's also because it shows him as being a useful tool for his mother. He goes out there, he treats with the Freys, he finds out what they want for bent knees. And I just love his verbal sparring with the Freys in this episode. My mother doesn't want whatever, she wants bent knees.
Yeah.
And so the Freys want Harrenhal in exchange for their bent knees. And so we'll see what happens with all of that, but he comes back and he gets told the Song of Ice and Fire by Rhaenyra.
Mm-hmm.
Basically,
which really marks him as the heir.
Yeah, confirming him as her heir.
Yeah.
But I think that's really all the... the
White Worm.
What's that?
White Worm.
Yeah, White Worm, go ahead.
So she had mentioned before there's more than one way to win a war, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is where she's they're forgetting the small people. And
right.
This is where we kind of really flash in between the blacks and the green. Well, throughout the episode we were, but you start really seeing the descent in King's Landing, right? These small folk are leaving in droves, and then all of a sudden, they
can't.
Aemon is nope, close the gates.
Yeah.
We're not letting him leave.
Yeah.
We need hostages. That's how I interpret it. So they don't just bring their dragons in and burn everything to the ground. Much like in Game of Thrones, Cersei did?
Yeah, Cersei, I think she closed the gates and locked everyone in.
Yeah. But she does... By the end of the episode, Rhaenyra does send her handmaiden, right, into King's Landing, and she talks with a girl who was the same girl that Aegon had taken against her will and then fed the anti-pregnancy drink, and then was kind of hit on at the bar the last episode. And yeah, it's kind of leaving some room for interpretation there about what's going on, but something's a brewing with the small folk. Anything you want to add with that? I think
not really. It's straightforward. I think that I will spoil this and say that the title of the next episode is Small Folk.
Yeah.
So we'll see the impacts of this in the next episode for sure.
Yeah. Again, it's the impact of not having food and stuff for a while and not being paid coin for your work, which that was all brought up in this episode. It's really just simmering again to a all-out revolt. Now, let's flip, if you're good with the blacks.
Totally.
Okay, so let's get to King's Landing here. So we have a lot of interesting stuff happening with, Maylise's head is carted around, and the reaction from the city folk was so interesting, right?
They were in shock.
The whole goal was to be like, oh yeah, like we beat their dragon, like wow, but like it's more like, oh my gosh, they killed a dragon. Why would they do that? Like,
right. And you hear the small folk saying, dragons, I thought dragons were gods. And so it's like kind of demystifying the dragons to the small folk, which is a mistake.
And by extension, the Targaryens.
Exactly. That's why it's a mistake.
And one person even says they're just meat.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's going to come back at some point, right?
I do think it was very interesting, though, how they were saying, here's the head of the traitor dragon Meleys.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the dragon made the choice to go and betray the crown. Sure.
Yeah.
I thought that was so dumb.
I did, too. I thought that was really poor talk. But we have, the queen and Aemon kind of watching on here. The queen looks over, notices the king's dagger on his brother's belt of weapons, and she can put two and two together, right? I'm pretty sure. But Aemon is taking over as
the Prince Regent.
Prince Regent, yeah. Basically ruler in charge while his brother's incapacitated. You have a lot of interesting stuff going on with Cole here. Like he's, cleaning his sword because he can't unclean his dirty heart. I don't know. Like the man is trying to scrub away all of his misgivings.
Yes. I mean, I do think what he says to Alicent in this episode is good as well. That, like, he's no longer useful. Like, this is now a war between dragons. Like,
which it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, it's escalated to that point where, like, normal men and women don't really have much say in the outcome of the war anymore.
Correct. It kind of makes me, if I can flip to One Piece here, at the Summit War, right? You had all those soldiers, like, fighting back and forth with all the bigs sort of hanging back. Like, doing little things here and there, but, like, once they're going in, like, those other people are meaningless, essentially. Right. And it was always... I haven't finished it yet. But, I mean, it's interesting because I'm sitting here like, why don't you just get the big... Like, let all these other people live their lives and just have the big baddies just attack each other and just be done with it, right? So... But it kind of seems like that here. It's like, we don't want to use the dragons. Let's have the people fight first and have millions of them die. Oh, well, now I guess we got to use the dragons.
Yeah. I mean, I think this does, though, going back to the black side, emphasize the loss of Meleys for Rhaenyra. Because as critical as it is to lose Rhaenys in everything that she represented, this is now a war between dragons, and she just lost her largest dragon.
Yeah. And, I mean, the good thing is like, the Greens did lose a dragon, too.
Right.
But that's also why it's like, oh, blacks, we need a little more firepower.
Right.
But the big thing here for the Greens was really, I think, Queen Alicent, like, basically finding out, I have no more power. I have no power. I have no influence. You have her try to be the regent for her son and get shot down. And in that scene, like, they focused on her and it kind of got
more fuzzy. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like now she's like,
Now she's a
I
background
can't
character.
contribute. Yeah. I've gone from being someone in power to I have no power. Kind of like her dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. And we have Aemon, staring dreamily at that throne like, I'm going to be king. And his sister comes in and is like, was it worth it?
Yeah.
'Cause she knows.
She knows what's up.
She's like, I know what you did.
She may be mad, but she can kind of like see like future-y things and stuff.
Yeah.
Like prophecy a little bit.
For me, with them, that's kind of all I want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think where this episode ends is, again, like what you had talked about, where kind of Jace bringing up to his mom, hey, what about them dragon seeds? And her being like, oh my god, this is a crazy plan. I love it. And so it ends kind of on not a super climax, but like a where is this going type of a question here, where what's going to be the result of this? Is it going to be like small folk coming to the rescue of these Targaryens, or is it going to be like the demystification of dragons as gods and the fall of the Targaryen dynasty? So it's really kind of like standing on that point of questioning which way history is going to go right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think
it'll be interesting to see as we go forward.
Yeah. I think for me, that really covers everything for this episode here. So we're going to wrap it up here, and this is going to be Two Nerds signing off. We'll see ya.
See ya.